that have other agronomists in your organization, you can certainly make sure they're aware of what they missed, but we'll share the recording here within the next day or so. But glad to have you on. Myself, Jim McDermott, technical agronomist for DEKALB and Asgrow, covering the western half of Northwest Iowa.
And Paige Thompson-Russ, I cover the eastern half of Northwest Iowa.
We just started these 2 weeks ago. As far as the format, we now have an acronym, so you can call it DACAT. Seems like everything has to have something that fits that you can say as an acronym. But just want to do an update on the current things that we're seeing, but also are wide open to topics that that you're seeing. We've got a lot of talented people on the phone, a lot of ears that are out in the field. So we want to make sure that we cover everything that we're seeing, but also you're seeing as well. Here's the agenda. Just a number of things, of course, that have been going on in the last week, especially with some of the corn rolling and looking tough. Talk a little bit about the roots, which means also rootless corn. Of course, some areas were fortunate enough to receive some rain, of course, also in the form of hard rain with hail late last week. We'll talk a little bit about some insects, especially corn rootworm, as the larvae are starting to hatch. We still have some things going on with unevenness in fields. And of course, a lot of it does go back to residue. And then soybeans, of course, we got different things going on with what we're seeing on soybean leaves. So many things going on, it had to be split into part 1 and part 2. And then we also have Chad Shaw on, so he'll give a little bit of a crop protection update, especially as it relates to some of the last herbicide spraying, and then as we are also going to be leading into fungicide spraying. All right, well, let's jump on into what some of the corn looked like last week.
Yeah, I took this picture on Friday. You know, we were needing some moisture, but the first 2 weeks, I would say about 2.5 weeks ago is when I first started seeing the corn kind of rolling, mainly in that heat of the day. The mornings and early evenings, the corn was kind of back to itself. So that was good to see. On record, the first 2 weeks in June was the driest in 129 years in Jim and I's area. So obviously it was dry prior to that, but pretty intense that first part of June. But yeah, we did get some spotty rains over the weekend, and these cooler temps will definitely help get this corn some relief. I really don't think it had too many issues as far as with that rolling. I don't think it was that significant in a wide area, just because of seeing things kind of go back to normal during that morning and evening hours. What did you see in your area, Jim?
Yeah, that's the number one question I was getting. Is it having a yield impact? Obviously some of the light ground stayed rolled in the evenings and even in the morning, and that's starting to take its toll. But for the most part, on the vast majority of acres, that roll was only for a few hours. This time of the year, up until V12, essentially the most we could lose is a 1 to 3% yield loss per day, and that would be considered after 4 days of basically intense stress, which we probably had. So you could say we were starting to cut in to yield just slightly, but with the stage we're at now, this is the time, if you're going to have stress, this is the time to have it, and not have the huge impact on yield. Once we get past the late vegetative stage, and obviously in the reproductive stage, is when we're going to take the most toll on our yield. That corn itself is protecting it. It's reducing evapotranspiration, so it's going to reduce the surface area on the leaves. So it's a defense mechanism. And as we saw, there's a lot of differences among hybrids. And of course, the question comes up, well, do you want a hybrid that rolls quickly or do you want a hybrid that stays open as long as possible? And I guess I've seen a lot of different hybrids over the years, and I don't think there's any correlation between a true drought stress hybrid that are very good in drought stress and how quickly they roll. I would take the example of DKC 5438, one of our best drought tolerant hybrids, and it usually is one of the quicker ones to roll. It's got a little bit of a thinner leaf, a little bit more of an upright leaf, and I think that has a factor as far as how quickly it tends to roll. So, is that hybrid more defensive and it's protecting itself quicker? You could say that would be the case, but I've seen other hybrids that are good stress tolerant hybrids that tend to keep their leaves open. So not a lot of correlation in the visual looks of the rolling right now as far as long-term stress tolerance. In fact, there's going to be more to do with stress tolerance late season with how that hybrid is able to pollinate. How are they able to keep that plant integrity? Are they able to have stay green late season? Those factors are going to be much bigger as far as that plant's ability to fill out the year and maintain stalk integrity late season in a drought stress situation. Should comment, if we've got questions, certainly bring them up. You can also put them in the chat. We want to make sure we're addressing the questions and comments that you on the phone have.
Absolutely. Corn roots. In this particular situation, I had been getting quite a few calls on some sulfur deficiencies, and there's some compaction going on out here. You can see those roots on that side. It was driving downwards instead of outwards, so some sidewall compaction, and also some heavy residue in this field. It was no-till, so seeing some deficiencies there. What appears to be sulfur, we'd have to do some tissue sampling and other things to look at that. But all in all, things do look pretty good out there. But this is just one scenario that I ran across. We didn't really have intense freeze thaw going on in the winter time frame. So there is some compaction going on in some fields.
Yeah, it's amazing how hard some of the soil is getting, especially down to about 4 to 5 inches. We still have a lot of fluff in that top 3 to 4 inches. And with that fluff is really what we're concerned about with the roots. You always hear the wives' tale, well, we got to have dry weather to drive the roots down. And that's not necessarily true. Roots need moisture to grow. And if they are sitting in a completely dry environment, say in the top 2 to 3 inches, they're not going to grow real well. So we do have to have moisture for those roots to grow. And of course, a lot of the nutrients are taken up in that top 2 to 3 inches, sulfur, nitrogen, and potassium especially. And now all three of those nutrients are starting to take off as far as the uptake or the need on the corn plant. So certainly expect, if we continue to stay dry, to see more nutrient deficiency symptoms show up now or in the future. If we're not pulling those nutrients into the plant, certainly going to be a concern, and especially nitrogen and drought go hand in hand. We need moisture to bring that nitrogen into the plant.
Rootless corn syndrome, not a lot of calls on this one, but it is super important to a scouting pass out there to evaluate some early root health. The nodal roots are very important in providing the majority of the water and mineral nutrients in the soils. So I guess the main calls that I've gotten are from some shallow planting situations. That bottom picture probably isn't fair to put that up there, but that was from 2012, from a serious situation as far as, yes, it was dry. So you can see what's going on with those nodal roots. They've kind of hardened off there. And even if that situation had gotten some moisture, they probably would have struggled to regenerate. But dig up some dig up some corn plants, take a look, see what's going on. And, you know, by the 4 leaf stage, nodal roots are larger and cover a wide area than the seminal roots. So we're around that, V7 to V9 in some situations. So we should be seeing some pretty darn good nodal root development out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would agree. I haven't seen this too widespread. We didn't have a lot of sidewall compaction at planting, but I did see some cases where just because of the wind, if we had any sort of a crack in the furrow, the wind was moving these plants around, and then of course with the heat, it was causing those nodal roots to be calloused or just hardened off, and then they had a hard time developing, of course, until we got any sort of moisture.
Yep.
So jumping into the next topic, and these pictures were actually from Grant at Stalkup Farm Management down in the Alta Aurelia area. So usually when we have heat, it brews up some thunderstorms, and in this case, some hail. And I know there was a fair amount of hail alerts on my climate account over the last 5 days. Corn, we know, as Paige mentioned, we've got a lot of V7 to V9 corn. We've got the growing point above ground, so it can certainly take a bruising or can actually get hit and kill the growing point if the hailstone hits it directly. Usually the main problem is all the dead tissue on top, just like the frost from a few weeks ago. Trying to be able to grow through that dead tissue usually can lead to disease, usually can lead to uneven growth. And of course, the loss of leaf area certainly is going to set that plant back. Technically, a lot of the hail charts won't give much yield loss until we get to V7 as far as defoliation. But we do know those plants will be uneven and set back. Obviously, for corn, it would have to be a huge stand reduction to cause replant. We'd have to be well under 15,000 to justify replanting. And obviously, we're on the border if we'd want to replant corn at this point. Soybeans, it just comes down to assessing the stand, seeing what we've got for viable plants. I would be using about 65,000 for a stand count. Definitely different factors to influence that, but some of these beans were getting big enough, V3, V4, where there's certainly some bruising on the stems that we have to be concerned about late season. Even if that plant is a viable plant, it still is susceptible to lodging. So have to take that into account when we're taking our final stand estimations.
Yeah, one of the big questions I get every year, if we do have a hail situation, which is very unfortunate, but as far as the fungicide piece of it, so when should I spray fungicide? And Chad can speak to this if he wants to as well. But I really like to see some new regrowth. I like to assess these fields, especially the corn, a good 3 to 5 days, but you get a really good idea with a week's worth of growth. But so yeah, I still, even this early time frame, if a fungicide is going to be put on, I still would like to wait around that VT to R1. I don't think we really need to get that put on right away after an event like this when it's around that V7. I still like that VT to R1 timing in this situation. And then on soybeans, around that R3 again. No need to speed it up to get out there. Let's see some new growth out there as well. And then also on the herbicide side of things, waiting at least for a couple of leaves to come out would be ideal.
Yeah, I can touch on that a little bit, Paige. I guess I guess my recommendation has always been, and I know the other reps on the chem side have been, wait about 3 to 7 days at the most, and then we actually are recommending getting that fungicide on ASAP. I mean, we need to get that corn protected. It's went through stress. It's just like to me, we always go back to the human body. I mean, if the human's sick, I mean, you don't wait until it's really, really sick and treat it. I mean, the earlier we can treat that, the better off we've been, is what we've seen. So, yeah, I guess I would say probably just the opposite of what you said. As soon as we can get a fungicide on that plant, we would recommend. Our recommendation is going to be get it on. So
Super.
that's my 2 cents anyway.
Nope.
That's what your customers are going to be hearing from the chem side.
All right, that sounds good.
Mhm. Okay. Well, Chad, maybe we'll have you comment a little bit later on some of the herbicide recommendations too, to finish up the spray season.
You bet. Yep.
All right, jumping into a few other topics. Rootworm and really, I would just say all insects. A year like this, when we've been dry, we're ahead of the norm on heat units. The rootworm are certainly starting to hatch and take off. This happened to be over in Sioux County late middle of last week, but a little tough to see in that picture, but certainly had at least a second instar rootworm larvae showing up. Surprise, surprise, it happened to be on chrome, but we all know the less protein expression is present in chrome, 2/3 expression of the Herculex extra. So not a surprise that you're going to see that early. Obviously, anything that's traded with BT, you can still see rootworm. It's just a matter of how quickly they get killed. This particular location, I have the SmartStax Pro picture, and it was right in the next row over, and roots looked very good, both right out of the field before I washed it off, and then next picture showing what it looked like when it was washed off a little bit. So side by side, in this time of the year, mostly what we're looking at is scarring, a little bit of browning, scraping on those roots. Of course, there are larvae present, but the larvae are really just starting to get after it. Digging roots, putting them in a bucket and floating them gives you an idea, but washing them off and looking for those brown tips are probably the easiest way to find the damage. But very happy with how the SmartStax Pro looked. If we continue to stay dry, and obviously with the pressure we had last year, I would anticipate it to be a heavy corn rootworm year. We've got eggs laid probably deeper than normal just because of the cracks we had in the soil last year, and that does keep them protected. Because the question did come up last week about, we've got such intense heat, and the top 2 to 3 inches of the soil temperatures were very high. Most of the rootworm eggs are probably laid a little deeper than that. Again, just because of the cracks. Typically, the beetles will lay the eggs about 4 inches, but with some of the cracks, we probably had them lay deeper than last year. So I'm guessing the heat did not hurt them too bad, and just having dry conditions helps their survival tremendously this time of the year.
Yep, we'll definitely be continuing the update on SmartStax Pro throughout the season, so stay tuned. It's pretty exciting. So
now, as far as other insects, Paige, what else do you expect to be a problem, or what are you starting to hear?
I think it's important to keep the soybean gall midge on top of your mind. I know typically in the past we've seen that more so, in eastern Nebraska, moved to western Iowa. Currently, we've been finding that it is in BV and Sac counties. So that is definitely one to keep in the back of your mind. That's a tough one to handle just a little bit. It's a very small fly-like insect that lays eggs, and then those larvae burrow into that soybean plant in that stem. So it's tough to scout sometimes, but definitely those field edges are ones that you can tell if there's something going on. Either it's stunted or it just doesn't look right color-wise. There's something going on there. So another indication is if that soybean plant kind of tips over or falls over kind of at that soil line, those larvae are in there doing their thing. But that's definitely one to think about.
Yeah, and I would add Sioux County is also another county where they've been found as of late last week. So they have been emerging in northwest Iowa. The soybean gall midge alert out of Nebraska is recommending, now would be the time to border fields if you're going to treat. And of course, the treatment, I wouldn't say it's control, but it's going to help. But I would only target fields that have had past history. Certainly not something to go out there across the board and start bordering fields. And mainly one of the reasons is we can knock out a lot of the predatory insects, and another potential insect for this year with the dry weather, of course, is spider mites. And if we're using a pyrethroid on some of these cases for soybean gall midge, it might flare spider mites or might take out the predatories that are usually helping us on spider mites. So it's kind of a balance. I guess I would be very cautious as far as bordering fields for soybean gall midge. Spider mites have been seen on corn. I don't know of any cases on beans yet, but if we're seeing them in June, it could be a challenge. We could be fighting them all season if we continue with this weather pattern.
Yeah, I did hear that. I know in central Iowa, spider mites were found in corn. I'm sure they're sprinkled throughout there, throughout the state. But one thing to look at when it comes to when they're on the corn, it kind of makes the leaves a little lighter in color, kind of speckling a little bit too. But definitely keep an eye out on that for sure.
All right, well, let's finish up with a few topics here on soybeans. And again, if you have questions, throw them in the chat or bring them up. Our good old friend residue, and can't seem to break this stuff down. I think a lot of people are certainly looking forward to short-statured corn just from a residue management standpoint of what we're dealing with every year, seems like lately. But I think, Paige, you had taken this shot affecting the soybeans here.
Yeah, so I mean, residue has been such a big piece of the puzzle this year when it comes to, we had that Memorial Day weekend frost, and just emergence and how plants are growing. Again, we didn't have that intense freeze thaw over the winter time frame. And then also just the drier weather last year and what we're up against this year too. So one thing that organic matter, when it mineralizes, breaks down and everything, we can get some pretty good nutrients out of it. So that's, a little bit of what's going on out there as well. But yeah, I continue to get calls on the residue side of things. But yeah, moving into the soybean leaf calls. This started a good, I would say about 2-3 weeks ago as well. And with these particular pictures, the top two just had Zidua Pro as a pre out in this field. And, we kind of had those tougher situations as far as it was dry, cool, and then it turned warm and that plant started to actively grow. The environment is definitely the driver to a lot of these pictures here that I'm going to go through. So soybeans can put out a new leaf every 2 to 3 days during this time frame. So those top two plants, you can see the new trifoliates are coming out nice and green. So really no serious effect going on here. So that bottom right picture where you can see some browning, bronzing, there's a metribuzin product put out, and this is from a soybean variety that had a little more sensitivity to that metribuzin. So 23X9s in our lineup, we do know that it does have some sensitivities, but historically it's grown out of it. We first saw it last year. no real issue to be had there with that. And then the other plant, I guess it's to the right. Sorry. It is, that field was showing some white around, a halo around the leaves, showing some HPPD carryover. You know, again, with our drier soils that we've had in some situations, just had a tough time breaking down that the chemistry. But a lot of times, especially with, you know, the carryover piece of it, you could overlay a soil type map to it and definitely see some patterns out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would just add, you know, in addition to the 23X9s, we do have the 20XF1s and 24XF1s that are rated below average in tolerance to PPOs. And of course, with as many PPOs as are being used, we can see the effect. And I would say this year more so than most. And part of that is, you know, some of the things Paige mentioned, but boy, typically we have symptoms, and then that soybean plant's able to metabolize the herbicide and grow on through it. Well, soybeans have kind of stalled out with the dry weather, so they're just taking a lot longer to metabolize that herbicide and grow through the tough looking stage here. But you know, long term, I'm not too concerned. Soybeans can look tough early and recover without any problem, and we've seen it pretty much every year.
Yep. You can go for this one, Jim. I think these are
Yeah, so yep, some different things going on here. Most cases we're looking at environmental, but some herbicide interactions on the left side, just a Roundup and Select tank mix. And it's actually on Extend soybeans, but you know, reaction to the surfactants and reaction from the environmental conditions. I've seen soybeans that haven't been sprayed with anything that also show wrinkling and puckering.
Mm-hmm.
Also, that the right picture there is kind of that typical heart-shaped or drawstring effect, which more often than not we get from the Group 15 or the acetochlor products, Warrant, Outlook, those type when they're sprayed post-emerge or even pre-emerge. That type of wrinkling and puckering has been fairly common this year.
Yep. Started seeing some soybean flowers last week, which is really good to see those come out early. But can we go back? Let's go back just one slide real quick. You know, one thing to remember too, what we saw last year is with extreme heat, you know, it showed these types of symptoms. So let us know if you're seeing anything like this out there. But you know, a lot of the situations and the wrinkling last year was definitely a head scratcher. And again, environment played a huge role as well. So just want to throw that in there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, good. Well, we are at the point we're wrapping up with what we had, but certainly open it up for questions. We also want Chad to make a few comments as far as some herbicide applications, but maybe I'll just take a pause, see if there's any questions, comments from the group right now.
Jim, the only other thing that we've been seeing a fair amount of is, you know, you see that yellow leaf as those plants unwrap. We've had a fair amount of that rapid growth syndrome showing up. I don't know if you want to mention or touch on that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Carrie. And you know, even with the heat and rolled corn, we still had corn growing very fast. And you know, different hybrids react. Some hybrids will roll pretty tightly. You know, it looks like almost a growth regulator, but most cases it just tends to be that rapid growth and how a hybrid will react to it. And then, of course, as it comes out of that wrapping, you start to see the yellow flags or the yellow top leaves just because they haven't been exposed to the sun. So that's certainly been taking place. I probably noticed it a little bit more in the 5464, 5465 family. That one tends to show it a little bit more, but certainly been showing up over this last week. Any other questions, comments from the group? All right, well, Chad, we'll let you make a few comments, especially on spraying herbicides and kind of where we're at that way with finishing up our soybean spraying.
You bet. Thanks, Jim. I'm driving to another meeting, so if I start breaking up, yell at me and I'll stop on top of a hill here. So, but anyway, a couple things that I think are important is one is first I want to go back to Paige's comment early on the fungicide. Like I said, the recommendation is from the chem side is going to be to get that sprayed, but by all means, we're not saying, hey, that's going to be our fungicide application. If we're doing fungicide right now early on soybeans or corn, we are for sure recommending that we're still doing it at tassel. So once again, it's not that's our recommendation, but that's not our only fungicide application. I mean, we still want to get it done at tassel. So I wanted to touch on that. And then the other thing is June 30th is coming up here. That's our deadline for extend. Anything after that, we can't be using extend. You'll have to contact us for other recommendations if we don't get things sprayed. One thing that we're seeing on the chem side that's kind of biting, in my opinion, kind of biting us in the butt is, so we've been hot and dry, and there's a lot of guys sprayed extend last week. I know of quite a few acres that got sprayed with extend. The plan was extend, warrant, Roundup. Well, it was hot and dry. Guys in their mind tried to outguess Mother Nature, left the warrant out. That is, to me and my teammates, is just an absolute no-no, especially this year. One, I'm sorry, but you're not going to outguess Mother Nature. Stick with the plan, get your residual in there. For one, obviously it rained this weekend in a lot of areas, so the warrant would have worked. And two, guys, we're out of Roundup. So if we don't get a residual in there, and we've got grass escapes in July, you're pretty limited. Because if you can find Roundup, you're a lucky man. So just stick with the plan, get your residual in there. And we just got to pray for the best because, like I said, chemicals are tight, and the next thing is, what are we going to retreat that grass with? So, yeah. And then also remember resprays as well. I don't know the whole audience here, but if you're just going to spray extend Roundup, obviously that takes the respray off the table because you don't have a residual in with that extended Roundup. So, but other than that, the only other thing, Jim, that I've been seeing, I actually was on a couple calls, one over the weekend and a couple last week, is Diflex Duo, Diflex. Extend is taking some heat for some cup beans. And every case that I've been on, I'm not by any means slamming any other traits or talking bad about them, but we are seeing on the E3, especially when we're spraying Enlist with Liberty, them beans are cupping bad. And you're seeing it around the grove, fence line to fence line. And the first initial reaction is, hey, call the bearer up. Diflex killed my beans, or Extend killed my beans, or Lautus killed my beans. So just, walk slow, go out, look at the field. I mean, don't accuse anybody until you look at the field, but let's get out and look at it and see what's going on.
That's good.
Yeah, good point, Chad. And we saw it last year pretty consistently that the E3 beans, the trait does not seem to have complete tolerance, I guess is one way to say it, but it tends to wrinkle a lot quicker than some of the other traits out there.
Yeah, and especially when it doesn't seem like it's quite as bad with when we're seeing it with Power Max, but the Liberty Enlist is, as we know, coming from, we used to have Liberty, obviously. There's a high load of oil in that Liberty. So I'm assuming that's our issue there. But yeah, like I said, I'm not slamming the trait, just giving you a heads up what we're seeing.
Yeah. Oh, good points, and appreciate that, Chad. And yeah, so the end of the month as far as the dicamba. Last year, and I know Denny Lawrence has emphasized this, but we talked about the 45 days after planting. That's off the table. That's not part of the label at all this year. Through R1 is part of the label, so that's something to we can spray at R1, which is where we're at with a lot of our fields. But we technically can go through R1 until we get to R2, and R2 is when we've got flowers at one of the top 2 nodes. So we're little ways off from that. Most fields are either still in the vegetative stage or just getting to R1. So we do have time as far as that part of the label goes too with our dicamba formulations.
Yep.
All right. Anything else, Chad?
Nope, that'll do it. As always, if there's any questions, don't be afraid to call.
Thanks, Chad.
Yes, thank you. Paige, anything else you have? I know we are a little over time, but any last?
Yeah.
Topics?
I think this was a good one. I think we covered a lot. What both you and I are seeing, and probably everybody else as well. It's been quite an eventful year so far, and probably will continue. But yeah, just get out in the fields, take a look at things, proactively scout. I think that's super important. Get a good idea, a story. Put your story together as far as what you're seeing. So I think that's it, Jim.
My motto is never go into a cornfield without a shovel this time of the year. That's key, to be looking at the roots. Usually that's going to give you all indications as far as what is going on above ground. All right. Well, one last call for questions. All right. Well, I appreciate everyone for being on, and have yourself a good Monday. Thank you.
Thanks.